Everybody wants to talk about hockey. How often do you get asked about that?
Every day. Every day somebody wants to know about Illinois hockey, which is great. I think it speaks to the interest that people have in the sport.
Does your answer change every day?
Not every day. It does change gradually over time, but not every day.
You say you're confident can be self-sufficient. How does that change your outlook and what it can be here at U of I, Josh?
Well, that was a big moment for us to identify that we had a model in place that would allow us to support the operation of hockey. And again, I think it's important to separate that out from the facility itself, which has a whole nother set of financial implications. But from a sport perspective, to be able to operate staffing, recruiting, travel, equipment, all the associated expenses, and to be able to do it by generating the revenue that hockey would create was important for us to recognize, and certainly helped us move the ball forward in that entire evaluation.
It all comes down to money, right? If someone had, how much more money would you need to get this project green-lighted?
Oh, I probably won't sit here and give you a number, but I think we're getting closer. We're getting closer. It's been a very rewarding experience to see all the partners who have come around the table, different companies, community organizations, individual donors, city, the developer. There's just been a lot of different groups that have a very vested interest in seeing this happen. And that makes it one of the most rewarding projects I've ever worked on. And so we've got a few key partnerships that aren't quite there yet, and we can't move the project forward until we get them where we need them to be. And so that's been our focus here in recent weeks, and will continue to be our focus until we're able to get it done, and then we'll move forward.
You told us today that Title IX implications are not there in terms of having to add a women's sport. How much did that play into the fact of, hey, this will help us get this thing going?
Well, there were just a lot of questions that we needed to answer as we started down this exploration, and certainly one was, how much is hockey going to cost? Hockey itself, can we pay for it? And then secondly was Title IX, and what are the implications of adding a men's sport like hockey on our compliance with Title IX. For a long time, I think we thought that it would be necessary to add or subtract women's or men's. And then ultimately, as we started to look a little more deeply, we consulted with some people on the outside. We reached a conclusion that we can do this with just the men's team, and that helped to solve one of the questions that we had out there, and I think makes it much more feasible for us to get there without having to worry about the financial considerations, in particular of potentially adding a women's sport.
You've long said we will win, and you made it clear today that now it's time to win. How much of that has changed in where you're at and your mindset, and of everything coming to where it's time to succeed on the field for your two main sports here in football and men's basketball? I
don't think I'm not changing my mindset. I think that what I care most about is I care about process and I care about progress. And I think that we have seen a good process put in place both in football and basketball. I think this past year we saw great progress in both of those sports, and I have every expectation that we'll continue along that same trajectory in both football and men's basketball. And so I think it's exciting. It's an exciting time where we've done a lot of heavy lifting in recent years, made a lot of changes, put in place a lot of plans, and now our student athletes are a little bit older, our staff is a little more cohesive, and I think we're in a good place now to start to realize some of the benefits of all the work that has gone into getting us to this place. And so I hope our fans share that optimism, they have that same enthusiasm that I do, that our entire program does about the future outlook of those sports. And I don't know that it will, again, I'm not going to sit here and project wins and losses. It's not what I do. But I do think that fans will see more competitive teams, and I expect it will mean more wins. And I think we're in that window now, whether it's this year or next year, I don't know, but we're in that window where all of us have earned the right to be successful, and we've got the right people in place to have successful Big Ten programs.
How do you relate with the fans in that who are so hungry here, Josh, to see success in football and men's basketball? And I know you are too in that sense, but you also have a responsibility and a job to keep an oversight and a bigger picture aspect of it. How do you kind of balance those two to relate with the fan base and also keep a realistic picture of where you're at in this long-term process?
I think you said it, really. I mean, that's incumbent on me as the athletic director is to understand and appreciate the frustrations and the passion that our fans have for success in our programs, but yet also recognize that I'm in a unique position of having full access to information. I know exactly what's happening behind the scenes with those sports and every other sport to try and put them in positions to be successful. And I have to make decisions about the best long-term interests of Illinois athletics. And sometimes that may end up being what seems to be at odds with the short-term objectives and needs of our fans. And I recognize that. It's part of the job. But I think that hopefully, we're in a position where all those things can come together at the right moment.
Were you surprised by Luke Ford in a sense? You said you had a strong case. You said you felt good about that going into it. How much did that catch you off guard in either the first denial or the waiver denial as well?
I don't, surprise probably isn't the right word. It takes a lot to surprise me at this point in any part of my position. But disappointed, certainly I feel strongly about Luke. I'm really pleased and grateful to him for choosing to come to his in-state university. And we were looking forward to having him on the field this fall. And we'll continue to support him and get him ready to go in the fall of 2020. As I've said, I think that I'm hesitant to be too critical of the NCAA because I am the NCAA. We are all members of the NCAA, and although we get frustrated at times with the conclusions that they draw, they're drawing those conclusions based on criteria that we've asked them to give us. And so if we don't like the criteria, if we don't like the decisions, then ultimately we need to be responsible for changing the process. And certainly transfer reform has been a topic of conversation all across this country. I haven't been in a meeting in months where it wasn't a primary topic. And I think if we're not happy with the way the transfer environment is occurring, whether it's the rate of transfer or the way in which those transfers are being handled, then ultimately we need to be responsible for trying to do something about it.
Is it that easy, though, to just say, look, you can transfer once and be done with it? I mean, is the conclusion that simple, that you have one free pass no matter what they say?
That's a different question. That's a different, if it were that simple, I think we would have gotten to that place a long time ago. And so, obviously there's a vested interest institutionally in roster stability and in trying to, I think, part of the educational experience is teaching student athletes to overcome adversity, to deal with challenge, and not to look for the next opportunity at the first sign of adversity. And so there are a lot of competing interests to that general philosophy. I'm not casting a vote one way or the other. I think there's a lot of ways that this could be pieced together, but it's not a simple solution. If it were, we would have found it a long time ago. We've had people much smarter than me working on this for a long time, and it's difficult to build consensus around the transfer topic. And that, I think, is the reality that's proving very difficult to overcome.
But that's the consistency part, right? Where a Josh Fields or Tate Martell gets a waiver and Luke doesn't, and people say, well, where's the transparency in this? And there's just not.
Well, there's not, but that doesn't. People don't deserve transparency on everything, right? I mean, when it deals with student athletes and their individual circumstances, just because the public wants to know doesn't mean that the public deserves to know. And so presumably transparency is happening within the institutions, and that's what matters the most. But every case is different. Every circumstance is different. We've asked the NCAA to evaluate each of these cases independently, because if we wanted them to just grant every waiver, then that's what we would tell them. They wouldn't have to evaluate these cases. And so I don't know the circumstances of those other students and why their waivers were granted. I know the circumstances of Luke's. I know why his wasn't granted. But ultimately, some of those details are best kept private, and that's the way that these cases generally are intended to be handled. You
mentioned that Lovie Smith was with Bobby Roundtree, and you made a statement on just the integrity of what that means for him. What does that say about the man Lovie Smith is and him being there for Bobby for that week plus that he was there in his hospital room?
I think it speaks to a lot of the things that Lovie and I talked about the very first time that I met him. The first time I went to Tampa and sat with Lovie at his kitchen table, we talked about his recruiting philosophy, and he said, Josh, he said, I won't recruit anybody to Champaign who I don't want to be a part of my family for the rest of my life. I've never forgotten that. And I think that this entire situation with Bobby has demonstrated that in spades, to see the way that he has cared for Bobby, the way that he's been present for Bobby, has really been moving for me. And I think it's a testament to who Lovie Smith is as an individual, and the kinds of relationships that he strives to create with the student athletes under his charge. I feel very fortunate that he's our head football coach, and I think it's unique among his peers to see him there and active in the way that he was. It was a very special thing for him to do that.
And you called it one of the 2 worst phone calls you've ever gotten as an AD to hear that news. You've visited with Bobby, right? How has he handled this just in the early stages of this, and you know, what is his mindset going forward now?
Bobby's a fighter, and Bobby's an incredible young man. He's got a great drive. He's got a great motor. He's got great inspiration. And so I have every expectation he will tackle this the same way that he tackled quarterbacks. You know, he's going to hit it head on, and he's going to work as hard as he can to recover fully. And you know, we're not going to talk in great detail about his injuries or about his prognosis, but I know one thing. I know Bobby is going to accept this challenge and attack it the same way that he's attacked everything else in his life. And I would never bet against Bobby Roundtree. He's a pretty special guy.
Speaking of challenges, Kevin Warren has a pretty big one stepping in as Big Ten commissioner. What are the couple of things that you want to see him tackle the first couple of years on the job for him, and what are the biggest issues do you think that he'll face here as he takes over for Jim Delaney?
Well, I think in terms of the first few years, I think it's just becoming acclimated. It's learning the college athletics landscape. It's learning the players within the Big Ten Conference. Things as simple as visiting our campuses and learning about our leadership structures, our presidents, our chancellors, our athletic directors, our faculty representatives. Just becoming familiar with who we are, what we represent, our values. There are significant issues on the horizon, there's no question. Whether it's sports gambling, whether it's the things that we talked about with transfers, whether it's pay for play, name, image, likeness, expansion of the college football playoff. The list is pretty lengthy, and the Big Ten has to be in a prominent position of leadership on all of those topics. And I give Jim Delaney a lot of credit. I think history will view him as one of the most transformative figures in the history of college sports. And so that leaves pretty big shoes for Kevin to fill. And the good news is I don't know him well, but the people who I know who do know him well speak incredibly highly of him, of his experience, of his intelligence, of his drive. And so I think we found a good one, and looking forward to working with him.
You said gambling, one of those biggest issues, and you were a proponent to not have it be part of the state of Illinois and their new legislation. Why were you so against that in incorporating gambling on Illinois?
I'm not opposed to gambling on sports. I'm opposed to gambling on college sports. And I think that gambling on college sports comes with a set of risks that doesn't exist in other settings. You think about 18 to 22-year-olds and how influenceable they may be. You think about access to college student athletes versus access to a professional athlete. Somebody can easily walk up on our quarterback on the quad on his way to class. Somebody's not going to be able to do that to LeBron James. And then I think you've got the inherent risks of the gambler living in apartment A, and you've got the person he's gambling on in apartment B. And that to me just seems like a really difficult circumstance that we're creating by choice for our student athletes. Not to mention the fact that one of the new challenges that we're facing today is some of the pressure that our student athletes feel, some of the mental health challenges that they're facing, and knowing that every time they stand at the free throw line or every time they line up to kick a field goal, there are hundreds of thousands of people waiting to see the outcome of that event. And now with the advent of social media, all those people have a direct line of communication to them to tell them how great or how bad they are once the event happens. And if all of a sudden that event has the additional pressure of millions of dollars riding on whether that kick goes in or that basket is made, that's a lot to place on the shoulders of an 18 to 22-year-old. Most of our student athletes won't even be old enough to bet on sports themselves with the 21-year-old age limit. And so, you know, there's just some philosophical challenges that I have with it. I think most of the athletic directors in the state felt the same way, and really grateful to our state legislature for being willing to hear our concerns, and certainly prohibiting gambling on state of Illinois universities isn't a silver bullet. It's not a magic solution, but it does, I think, create some additional protections around our student athletes and our staff that I think are really important.
Another hot button topic that many people are happy to see is the sale of beer. How did you come to this conclusion, and what benefit, outside of the fan experience and the obvious, will this give your athletic department and the fans?
Well, I think I wouldn't dismiss the obvious. To me, it's about the obvious. You know, it's about the chance to get people to buy more tickets, use those tickets, come to the game earlier, stay at the game longer. Ultimately, we want people to be in the stands, and we also take a lot of pride on being responsive to our fans, and overwhelmingly, as we've surveyed them, as we've talked to them, as we've solicited their feedback, the number one thing that they wanted was the opportunity to buy beer at public concession stands. We had resisted that long enough. We wanted to see it become nationally acceptable, and we're to a place now where over half of the Big Ten schools are serving beer to the public. Over, I think, 50 schools in the FBS are doing beer sales in their football stadiums, and so we felt like it was a time now where, with the blessing of the campus, involvement of campus police, and the support of our dining partner, that we were in a good position to roll that out, and hopefully it'll be a great success for us.
And I thought it was cool too, the fan experience for the students right in that north end zone part. How did that come together in that space? What will you think of that for the students?
We're always looking for ways to try and, again, get more people in the stands, whether they're fans from local farms or students from just across campus. And you know, we're recognizing that people are having different expectations when they come into the stands today. They don't necessarily want to sit on a cold, hard bleacher and use the same bathrooms and have the same concessions, and there's more of a social aspect to the games than I think there's ever been before. And with the creation of the Smith Center, we'll be moving our football staff into that space. It frees up that patio in the northeast corner of the stadium, and so we were excited to tear down that wall and open up some opportunities for the students to get in there, to be on their 2 feet and enjoy some of the amenities of the stadium in a more social setting than what the North Stands has traditionally offered.
Was attendance the biggest reason the United Center game is going to be put on hiatus, as you said, for a while?
It certainly is one reason. I wouldn't say it's the biggest reason. I think, you know, as I mentioned, scheduling for basketball has changed dramatically over the last 25 years. The Big Ten's gone from 16 games to 20 games. When we started this game back in 1994, the Big Ten ACC Challenge didn't exist. The Gavitt games didn't exist. Schools could only play the multi-team tournaments once every handful of years, not every year like they do now. And we didn't have a great venue in State Farm Center that we do now, a building that we put over $100 million into. I think it's a great opportunity for us to celebrate our home fans, bring some great games here to Champaign. But yes, as attendance and the flagging attendance in recent years been a part of that calculus, there's no question that it has been. We tried this year to take a Big Ten game in there. Thought that us playing Ohio State at the United Center in Chicago would draw well, and it didn't. And so it's, I think, a chance for us to take a step back, let the game breathe a bit, and then bring it back at the appropriate time when we think we can return some of the mystique and the enthusiasm around it at some point in the future.
A couple more questions here as we wrap up. Is it as simple, and it's never as simple, Josh, but is it as simple as letting players get paid for their likeness? And what's inherently wrong with a student athlete that wants, if Io DeSumo wants to go pick up a car dealership and get paid for that? Most people, I think, that have a realistic viewpoint would say he should be able to do that. You say what?
I think that there is a growing support for that general concept. I think that we all recognize that certain of our student athletes during their time on our campuses are going to enjoy a moment of celebrity that they should be allowed to benefit from. Sure. The challenge is, with anything else, the devil's in the details. And so we haven't yet been able to identify a concept that addresses some of the opportunities for abuse that would exist in a setting like that. And so, whether it's a coach telling a donor who owns the car dealership, hey, I need to give this guy $1 million endorsement deal so that he comes to our campus. Those are the kinds of things that we have to try and protect against. And so how do you put a system in place that allows those student athletes who have that moment to benefit from it without creating a competitive landscape that's unequal or rife with abuse, I think is really the challenge. And so I think philosophically it's moved beyond, I think in most corners, a philosophical question. I think now it's more of a mechanical question, and how do we actually do it in a way that makes sense.
But it's not fair in that sense, right? Because a men's basketball player may hold more value than a swimmer at U of I. Are we all under that same understanding, you think, as a general, NCAA and overriding body? I mean, do you think most people get that Ayo Dosunmu may hold more weight than, a women's track athlete at Illinois, right?
Of course, and that's, I think the beauty of that potential system is it allows those athletes who have potentially more marketability to benefit from that marketability. And so, but again, figuring out how to do that in a way that doesn't create a disparate playing field or create opportunities for abuse is really the crux of the issue. And so,
yeah, sorry to cut you off, but the big thing you said is there's two separate issues there, right? Pay for play and likeness are completely different things. Yeah. Could you see one or the other moving forward faster and getting this to make it, so college kids can get paid for this multi-million-dollar industry that they play under?
Yeah, I think that I am a believer in the scholarship system. When it comes to pay for play, I think that there are very few athletes in our system. Out of 500 athletes, I think there are only a handful who could make a straight-faced argument that they deserve more than the value of the scholarship and all the associated benefits that they're receiving. And so, to me, the pay-for-play concept doesn't have a lot of interest. But I think that the name, image, likeness opportunity is more intriguing. I think it has more possibility, and it allows individual athletes potentially to benefit in a way that would solve some of the challenges that the pay-for-play issue continues to present.
Yeah, I think of a guy like D. Brown, right? Oh man, he could have had a lot of money in his pocket in that sense, just because of how popular he was, and same with a lot of these high-level athletes. As we wrap up here, the IHSA bid is going to be up here very soon, and how much would you enjoy seeing that back at State Farm Center in the flagship university and being played here, on your campus?
It would be great to have the basketball tournament back here. I think certainly with some of the changes we've made to the building, whether we're able to get the new downtown arena, I think could provide additional amenities for people who are coming into the community for that experience. There's great history and tradition of having that tournament here in Champaign, and we're excited to be a contributing partner in that process to put a good bid package together, put a good foot forward, and hopefully prevail upon the IHSA to bring that tournament back here.
You said upstairs that and you felt really good about getting that forward. Do you have a timeline on that, and on where you might hope to get that shovel in the ground?
Not a concrete timeline, or one that I'd be willing to share at this point. I think we've been very successful in the fundraising trail. People care a lot about Illinois basketball, and so we've found a lot of very favorable interest in supporting that project. And, we'll be in a position as time passes to share news of some of those gifts, but ultimately it's a project that I think has a lot of interest for a lot of people. And so when that ultimately turns into diagrams and dirt turning, as you said, remains to be seen, but I think it'll be sooner rather than later.
And as a former football player here, I'm curious what the Henry Dale and Betty Smith Football Center means to you, to see that now fully erect, ready to be opened here in just a matter of a couple months.
It's incredible. I've had a chance to tour some of the nicest facilities in the country, and once we open the Smith Center, there's not one that I would trade for it. It's long overdue. It's a great opportunity for us to support Illinois football But to know the work that's going to happen in that building, the benefit it will provide to our staff, to our student athletes, the boon it will be to recruiting, it really warms my heart. And to know, again, as with Ubben, all the different people who have stepped forward to help make that building possible is very humbling. People work really hard to make their money, and to have them be willing to step forward in such generous ways to get that project out of the ground and ultimately to make such a significant difference on the future of the football program is really a remarkable story, and one that we're excited to share as we open the building and ultimately dedicate it.